The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus Thompson pushed his cart down the sterile hallway of Riverside Corporate Tower, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor. At 3:47 a.m., the building was a ghost town, save for the occasional security guard and the man who made it shine every night. His calloused hands gripped the mop handle with the same gentle strength he used to braid his 7-year-old daughter's hair each morning before school. The same hands that had held her through countless nights when fever broke her small body, when nightmares chased away her sleep, when the weight of being both mother and father threatened to crush his spirit. Marcus had been cleaning these offices for 3 years now, ever since Sarah's mom walked out, leaving behind only a note that read, "I can't do this anymore," and the faint scent of her perfume that had long since faded from their tiny apartment. He'd taken the night shift because it paid better, because it meant he could drop Sarah at school and pick her up every day, because even though the work was invisible to most people, it was honest work that put food on their table and kept the lights on. The elevator chimed as it reached the 15th floor, and Marcus stepped out into the executive wing. This was where the real money worked, where men in $1,000 suits made decisions that affected thousands of lives with the casual indifference of gods playing chess. He'd learned to move like a shadow here, to make himself invisible while he cleaned around sleeping laptops and empty coffee cups. That cost more than his weekly grocery budget. As he began mopping near the conference room, voices drifted through the partially open door. The quarterly board meeting was running late again, and the exhaustion in the room was palpable. Marcus tried to work quietly, but his presence didn't go unnoticed. "Could you keep it down out there?" barked Richard Steinberg, the company's ruthless CFO, his voice carrying the entitled irritation of a man who'd never had to worry about making rent. "Some of us are trying to conduct business here." Marcus nodded apologetically and moved his cart further down the hall. But the voices continued to carry. They were discussing the company's expansion into international markets, specifically their new office in Mexico City. The conversation grew heated as they debated the costs of hiring local translators for important documents and client meetings. "It's ridiculous," Steinberg continued, his voice growing louder with frustration. "We're looking at $50,000 just for translation services in the first quarter. For what? So we can hold hands and sing Kumbaya with people who can't even speak proper English." Marcus paused, his hands tightening on the mop handle. He'd heard this kind of talk before. The casual dismissal of people who looked like him, who struggled like him, who worked invisible jobs that kept the world running while others took credit for its cleanliness. "Maybe we should just stick to English," suggested another voice. "If they want to do business with us, they can learn our language." The laughter that followed was sharp and ugly, the kind that cut through the air like broken glass. Marcus had been on the receiving end of that laughter before, when he'd applied for better jobs only to be told he was overqualified for positions that required a college degree, when social workers had questioned his fitness as a single father, when Sarah's classmates' parents avoided him at school events because his work uniform marked him as different. "Honestly," Steinberg continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "why don't we just grab one of the cleaning crew? I bet half of them speak Spanish anyway. Probably save us a fortune and get the same quality work." More laughter. Marcus felt his face burn, but he kept working, kept moving, kept being invisible. He'd learned long ago that responding to men like Steinberg only made things worse. But then the conversation took a turn that made his blood run cold. "Speaking of the cleaning crew," came another voice, "did you see that janitor out there? The one with the kid. I heard he's been asking for extra shifts. Probably needs the money for child support or something." "Single fathers," Steinberg scoffed. "They're all the same. Can't handle the responsibility, so they take whatever handout they can get. I bet he doesn't even know what real work looks like." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of Sarah, sleeping peacefully in their one-bedroom apartment, her homework neatly stacked on the kitchen table next to the bills. He'd been juggling for months. He thought of the nights he'd stayed up studying online courses, hoping to build a better future for them both. He thought of the sacrifices he'd made, the dreams he'd deferred, the strength he'd found in himself that he never knew existed. But it was the next comment that shattered something inside him. "I bet he can't even read half the signs in this building. Probably just pushes that cart around and hopes for the best." The laughter that followed was the cruelest yet, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper, a quiet dignity that had been building. 4 years. fed by midnight feedings and scraped knees and report cards that said Sarah is a joy to heaven. Class, a strength that came from loving someone more than your own comfort, more than your own pride. He finished mopping the hallway and wheeled his cart back toward the conference room. The door was still partially open, and he could see the executives. Inside, their faces flushed with expensive whiskey and cheap superiority. On the table lay scattered documents, contracts, and what looked like a sample translation that had clearly frustrated them. Marcus knocked gently on the door frame. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about translation services." The room fell silent. Steinberg looked up with the kind of annoyance reserved for insects that had the audacity to exist in his presence. "What do you want?" Steinberg snapped. "We're in the middle of an important meeting." Marcus stepped into the room, his uniform suddenly feeling like armor instead of a mark of shame. "I heard you say you needed someone to translate some documents. I could help with that." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Then Steinberg began to laugh, a sound that started deep in his chest and spread around the room like an infection. He wheezed. "You're going to help us with translation. This is rich. What's next? Are you going to teach us quantum physics?" The other executives joined in, their laughter bouncing off the mahogany walls and crystal chandelier. Marcus stood perfectly still, waiting for the storm to pass. "Listen, buddy," Steinberg continued, wiping tears from his eyes, "I appreciate the offer, but we need actual professionals. People with degrees. People who understand the nuances of international business. Not someone who pushes a mop for a living." Marcus nodded slowly, then walked to the table where the problematic document lay. It was a contract for their Mexico City expansion, filled with legal terminology and technical specifications that had clearly stumped their current translation service. "This section here," Marcus said, pointing to a paragraph that had been marked with red ink. "Your translator got it wrong. They translated complemento obligatorio as mandatory compliance. But in this context, it should be binding fulfillment. The difference could cost you millions in legal fees if a dispute arises." The room went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Steinberg's smile faded as he looked at the document, then at Marcus, then back at the document. "And this part," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, "where they translated plazo de gracia as grace period in Mexican commercial law. That's not accurate. It should be tolerance period, and it carries different legal implications for contract violations." Marcus moved to another section, his finger tracing the lines of text with the precision of someone who had spent years studying in whatever moments he could steal from sleep and survival. "Your translator also missed the cultural context here. When Mexican businesses use the phrase de común acuerdo, they're not just saying by mutual agreement. They're invoking a specific legal principle that requires good faith negotiations and shared responsibility for outcomes. If you don't understand that, you'll offend every potential partner before you even open your doors." The executives exchanged glances, their earlier amusement replaced by something that looked suspiciously like respect. But Marcus wasn't finished. "I spent 4 years getting my bachelor's degree in international business and Spanish literature from UCLA, he said, his voice calm but firm. "I was working on my master's when Sarah's mom left. I had to choose between finishing school and being the father my daughter needed. I chose Sarah." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room like dust after an explosion. "I've been taking night classes online when I can afford them, studying between shifts, practicing with Spanish-speaking families in my neighborhood. I volunteer at the community center, helping immigrants navigate legal documents and business contracts. I've translated for 3 small businesses in my area, helping them expand their customer base and avoid costly mistakes." Marcus straightened his shoulders, and for a moment, he looked less like a janitor and more like the educated, capable man he'd always been beneath the uniform. "So when you say you need someone to translate your documents, someone who understands the nuances of international business, someone who can bridge the gap between